The Florida Community of Mindfulness is happy to make these talks available to you. If you find this talk to be a benefit, please consider making a donation to support us. You'll find a donation button on the Talks section of our website, floridamindfulness.org. Thank you, and may you be happy and free of suffering.
So welcome, everyone. As you can see, there's something a little different this morning. Our community is honored to been having as a guest, actually since Wednesday, Roshi Hogen Bays. We've had various kinds of activities for him, formal and informal, including a retreat that just ended yesterday. For those of us who have been able to participate in these activities, it's been a wonderful experience that we have greatly benefited from. Roshi Hogen Bays is a little unusual, that he's an American Zen teacher who has been practicing seriously and deeply and wholeheartedly for more than 50 years. He is deeply experienced in the Japanese Zen tradition, having studied with several of the great modern Zen teachers, both in this country and in Japan, as well as he has exposed himself to other meditative traditions and philosophical traditions within the Buddhist vast corpus of practice. He and his wife, Jan Chosen Bays, are the co-habits of a large center in Oregon that has both a country residential center, training center, and monastery, as well as an urban center, somewhat like ours, in Portland. As well as I think many of you know, Roshi Bays and I began our Dharma careers together. 50 years ago at the Rochester Zen Center. We were both students of Roshi Philip Kapleau, so it is more than a time of happiness and meaning for me to have him here and for us to reconnect. We haven't seen each other in over 40 years, so this has been a wonderful experience for me. So I bow to you.
It's nice to see so many new and old friends. Talked to a number of you this last couple of days. Fred and I began practice in Rochester 50-some years ago, and in those days he was always cool, calm, self-assured, full of wisdom, and I followed him around like a little bunny. So here I am, still doing that. So this path is a practice. This practice is a path. And we could say it may have begun probably, people just sitting out in the ancient days looking at the stars and sitting, breathing the winds from the beach and sitting in the deserts. And people just sitting and simply being immersed in the natural nature, the natural life, the natural outflowing of nature. Simply becoming absorbed. Well, it became a Dharma practice. We're called in the ancient Indian traditions of samadhi. We're absorption, just being absorbed. And in a way, that's exactly what we're all still doing. We're just being absorbed in what is. Well, in ancient, you want me to hold it up here? In ancient Buddhism, that absorption, there were different levels of absorption called the jhanas. And the jhanas then in China became dhyana, and dhyana in China became chan, or some places it was pronounced zen, and in Japan it became zen, and in America it becomes mindfulness. So we are practicing a thread, a tradition that has gone on for millennium. And we may make up a particular, chant or a particular bell, but the essence of the tradition is a path of practice. And it's an ever-unfolding path, an ever-deepening path. As Roshi Kapleau used to say, it's like the ocean. The further out you go, the deeper it gets. And that's my experience. So this path always begins, as Fred was saying, with the body. It always begins with this moment. There actually is nothing but this moment. Nothing. Except our minds get involved and start remembering and thinking and processing and worrying, and we create the past. You don't even know if your houses are still there. It's not your direct experience. It's just a memory. You don't know if there's a car still out there in the parking lot. They may have all been stolen, I don't know. It's just a memory. Or we don't know what's going to happen. People are so worried about climate change and worried about all the injustices of our time. We don't know what's going to happen. It's all something the mind makes up, the mind projects. So the essential practice from the ancient times right up into this moment is the reality of being present. The reality of being in this body at this time. And thank goodness, I feel very fortunate. I've got a sharp mind, and it's very versatile and it's well educated. But if I believe that my mind is who I am, then I'm in trouble, because my mind is kind of crazy. Crazy with worry and crazy with doubt and crazy with all the stuff that minds do. You all know that. But if I am able to use the mind and able to be centered and present in the body, right here, right now, with the reality of this moment, there's an ease. There's an ease in the presence. And there's a delight. All of the burdens that we're carrying, all these worries, the mind makes up, and we add and we add and we add and we confuse ourselves. So the first stage of practice, and perhaps even the last stage of practice, and perhaps even the only stage of practice, is become embodied. Really feel this body right here, right now, just as it is. Now, in this culture, we're not used to doing that. People say, well, feel your body, and you feel, it's too fat, it's too thin, it's too old, it's too, green, it's too blue, it's too whatever the body, we have our particular things. Instead of being able to be in the body from the inside, as Fred was saying, when we're inside the body does not care what his shape or size or age is. The body does not care one bit. It just likes to be a body. But then our mind gets in there and says, I've got to have a better one. Better one, better one. Let's get rid of this. Let's cut that out. When we are actually able to rest in the isness of our own being from the inside, 3/4 of our anxiety, 3/4 of our worry, 3/4 of all of our problems melt away. And we still have to pay our taxes, It's that time of year. But you can pay taxes with tremendous anxiety and knots, or you can just do what you need to do. So the foundation of this practice, as Fred was saying this morning, is the reality which we all do experience of being present right here with this body. Now, when we are able to feel it from the inside, like Fred was saying, it's a very different experience than when we're thinking about it. We're looking in the mirror, we see what's in the mirror there, we kind of judge it, it needs a little more of this or a little less of that, or maybe I get a tuck here, or I'll cut that out, or maybe I'll get those raised, or maybe I'll put some blush on, or whatever, That's a whole way that, of course, we all look in the mirror and see the body in that way. But to actually see it from the inside, it doesn't need anything. There's social conventions, it's good to know that. But our security, our confidence, our presence is not about what we see in the mirror. And to actually begin to shift. So wherever we go, whatever state we're in, we're at home. It's part of the evolution of Dharma. Now, so that's something everybody has access to. Nobody is defective. Nobody is missing anything. Nobody is broken. Because everybody has the ability to be present, to feel their body from the inside, and to know and to touch the wholeness and completeness of their very being. See? It's easy. It's the whole path. Beginning, middle, and end. Just do that, and then you can sit up here and talk with Fred. But it is a path, and there are different insights on the path. One level of insight is, of course, this always coming into appreciation of right here. But nobody gets to be 60 years old without it taking 60 years. Nobody gets to be a physician without going through medical school and all those challenges. So there is something really important about this foundation of complete acceptance and confidence. There's nothing to be done. Can't go wrong. It's the only moment there is. Don't have to have a purpose in life. There's just this. And simultaneously, to realize that when I get up in the morning, I'm going to be making choices. I'm going to choose orange juice or coffee or tea or chai or hot water, whatever you choose. Throughout the day, we are making choices. So when we talk about being present and we talk about being in the body in this moment, it does not mean that we're constantly making choices. We're constantly moving. We're constantly evolving. Whether that happens from the inside or the outside, that's a whole different issue. So it's very important to understand this particular body-mind. Because when we are making choices that bring out the very best, the clearest, that which is already there, when we are making choices that are align ourselves with our deepest values, that align ourselves with our deepest heart, interesting things come out, and we all look different. And we all have different kinds of education. But when we are aligning ourselves with our thoughts or the cultural values of, oh yeah, I should do this, should do that, shouldn't do this, should do that, we end up trapped in a narrow rat race. So the foundation of actually being present in the body is a foundation. And then we need to learn how to live skillfully. So the first thing that we do, and the second thing we do, in my particular path, which is, Fred and I were just amazed that we've had such different, divergent paths. I was involved in the Zen tradition, and I've done hundreds of weeks of retreat. I've been involved with Japanese Buddhism and Theravadan Buddhism and a little bit of Vajrayana Buddhism, and he sort of rolls his eyes when he hears all the things that I've done. And he's been involved with Thich Nhat Hanh and Tibetan Buddhism, and those two of those teachers. But our teaching is very similar. I mean, we were both kind of amused at how much we were saying the same thing with the same words, coming from completely different histories, because the truth is the truth. And it may have a flavor of Tampa, Florida, or a flavor of Portland, Oregon, but it's still the truth. So the next phase on the path, whether you're taking the right wing path or the left wing path, the next place is ethics. Now, we talk, at least in my tradition, we talk about the 5 primary precepts. Not to kill, but to cherish all life, not to steal, but to respect the things of others, not to lie, but to speak the truth, not to misuse alcohol and drugs, but to keep the mind clear, and not to misuse sexuality, but to live a life of clarity and honesty. If with a clear mind, those 5 precepts became a foundation, 7/8 of the world's suffering would immediately diminish. And most of our suffering would immediately diminish. To be present in the body is not to be a zombie, but to be present in the body means to be able to be a living, engaged person who has a strong ethical foundation. So, just that first precept, not to kill, but to cherish all life. To cherish all life, all the older people probably remember Albert Schweitzer. That was his motto, his reverence for life, reverence for all life, reverence for all life, cherishing all life, cherishing each person that we meet, cherishing each person at the checkout counter, cherishing each animal that we encounter, cherishing, respecting, holding, appreciating, seeing. It's a miracle. How in the world did we ever end up here talking with air conditioning? I mean, a miracle. It's a miracle. And all of these interesting people and faces, it's a miracle. And to that first precept is that precept of I am engaged, I am present, and I'm amazed. Where did it all come from? Where did it all come from? Wow. I don't know, but it sure is amazing. And each person to cherish that life, to cherish that life. Think if that were just the flavor of our culture, think what a culture we would have. Think what a different culture we would have. So just that first precept alone, not to kill, but to cherish all life, coming from a place of confidence and presence, transforms us and will transform the world we live in. And actually everything else just unfolds from that first precept. Not to lie, but to speak the truth. So when we are practicing and we take the precepts, which you call them the mindfulness trainings? Yeah, same thing. Just Thich Nhat Hanh is very meticulous in trying to be all-inclusive. So our precepts are nice and 2 lines, and his precepts are 2 paragraphs. And they keep every year. I noticed they kept getting longer and longer, and bigger, and more inclusive. So that's for much smarter people than I am. I'm simple. I could keep 2 lines in mind. But if we think of a precept like not to lie, but to speak the truth, think of our relationships, how different that would be if that was the raison d'etre for our life. Not to lie, but to speak the truth. To endeavor to have integrity. To endeavor to be present. Oh, it would transform. Now, the interesting thing, any of you who have taken a precept like this, or any kind of precept, knows that to actually be able to do it is hopeless. We make a vow, I'm going to be respectful, and I'm going to be lie, and I'm going to be honest and truthful, and 10 minutes into the day we find ourselves bumbling around and saying unskillful things and mindlessly forgetting things and insulting and harming people and all the things that human beings do. So there are different levels of the precepts of the mindfulness trainings that are vital and I feel are vitally important. One is that from a place of being grounded and centered into this reality, we take the precept, we vow to be mindful, we vow to do all the things that we as good human beings like to do. The second one, which I feel is so very vitally important, is that we fail. To acknowledge that nobody's going to do this perfectly. And that we have to have the humility that comes from failure. There is nothing worse than somebody who only knows, I will be righteous. And everybody else had better be as righteous as I am, or else you're in trouble. It's a poison. So the second level of precept is vitally important, that we are human beings, we fail, we're inadequate, we're broken. That's part of being us. And from that, there is a humility that is vital to a healthy human life. No practice is about, I'm going to get better and better and better and better and wiser and more confident and strong. If you only saw that side of things, think how arrogant you'd be. I would be so totally arrogant. I'd be possible to live with. I'd be right and everybody else in the world would be wrong. We all tried that. Usually when we're about 18, we always try that. So the second aspect of really seeing our own failure, our own inadequacy, our own incompleteness. The only way we actually learn is through, when the mind is predicting things are going to have a certain outcome, and that outcome doesn't come, there's a cognitive disparity there, and then we learn from that cognitive disparity. Different language. But learning from humility, acknowledging our inadequacy. When we can truly acknowledge our own ignorance, we have the capacity to learn, to receive. We have the capacity to learn from everybody. So respect for all life is not, I know and I'm going to be a godlike being who respects all life, but rather, I don't know. I really don't know much. I have to respect the wisdom that's out there in every single person. Every person has got wisdom. Every single person with their particular life path, every single person has got so much wisdom. And so respect for all life means I can learn. I can learn. I can be present. And to have the confidence that we can do that by being in the body in this particular moment allows us to be open. And so then it becomes a lifelong learning. So the first level of precept is to take the vow. I vow to keep my mind clear. The second level of precept is the acknowledgement of, I'm going to mess up. If we only take the first level of precept, then the inner critic, that inner critical voice that we all know we have, the inner critical voice that said, oh, you should have done this, you should have done that, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you're inadequate here, you're inadequate there, it goes on and on and on. If we only take that first level of precept, we only take the aspiration, we're always inadequate, the inner critic has got so much fuel for the fire. Fuel for the fire. We actually do a whole lot of workshops where I am on the inner critical voice. Because as long as that inner critical voice is busy judging and judging and judging, and what we don't like outside, we don't like inside. What we don't like inside, we don't like outside. They're mirror images of one another. Until we can actually begin to recognize that inner critical voice and tame it by acceptance, by being in the present, by learning from it, then we're always at the mercy of inadequacy, incompleteness. So we start off by being complete and whole and centered. We then take the vows, we take the precepts. We then look and see our own inadequacy and the humility that's needed and the endless learning that's there. And there's another level of Dharma, another level of precept. This world is one whole thing. The whole thing functions together. It's like Indra's net. Each bead on the net reflects all the others. We're all holograms of the whole thing. The only person that you know in the whole universe is your own mind, your own life. And at that level, everything is okay. So when we actually see that everything is working together, everything is okay, we have the ability to fail miserably. Fail miserably, learn from it. Come back to the center. Take a vow. Fail miserably, learn from it. Come back to the center. Take a vow. Fail miserably, learn from the center. Come back. And all of us people who are at least my age or approaching that know that's how human beings do it. Nobody starts off and says, I'm going to be valiant and go right through the top of the mountain without falling off a few cliffs along the way. And those falls are essential. So we're here in a community. We're here in a community of mindfulness. We're here in a community where we settle into the present moment. We settle into the present moment with confidence, with clarity, with a sense of right balance. We make the aspiration for the very best we can be. Most awakened, most kind, most loving. We fail miserably. Again and again, and again, and again. We learn from those failures. From that learning, we come back to the center. We go back to the cycle. And each time that we hit that cycle, it's like a gyre. Each time we hit that cycle, we bring a little more wisdom to it, a little more depth, a little more confidence, a little more respect for all life, especially starting with this life. So the Dharma is a path, and it's not, we've got being present, taking a vow, whatever vow you feel is important to do. We do a whole week's of life vows or heart's aspiration, trying to really help people understand their unique offering to the world. Take a vow, you fail miserably at it, you come back to center and you make a vow. And you fail miserably at it and you make a vow. And you make a vow. And each time in our tradition we sit down, we say, I vow to become awakened for the sake of all living beings. I vow to embody the Buddha way for the sake of all living beings. And we fail and we make the vow. We fail and we make the vow. We fail and we make the vow. And as we go forward and take more and more responsibility for this life, for this mind, for this Dharma, within the next phase of practice is we have to serve others. We have to help others. A friend of mine used to tell me I'd been practicing for 20 or 30 years. My wife was the main teacher at our center. He said, look, if you do not start teaching, everything is going to congeal inside of you. It's going to become this big blob of, unappreciated, unexpressed selfishness. So the next aspect of practice is we have to serve. We are not islands all by ourselves. We have to serve. So we clarify our mind, we take the vow, we learn, and we begin to serve. And there are lots of ways of serving, as you all know. And sometimes we serve our family, and sometimes we serve our relatives, and sometimes we serve the Dharma, and sometimes we serve our businesses and our work. We have to serve, we have to give. Because it's in the giving, it's in the opening up our wisdom that it becomes real. So when we are actually able to offer our wisdom, when we're actually able to practice medicine instead of just reading about medicine, instead of studying medicine, we're actually able to practice it, something begins to flow through us. Something begins to flow through us. And that flow is how the Dharma becomes alive, how it wakes up. We can practice and we can practice and we can practice, and goodness knows I know that side of things. But until we serve others, it doesn't become really alive. So that's the next phase of practice, is serving others. And you start serving by ringing bells or offering tea or being kind to your people at work, or treating your patients with kindness, or you start serving others by how you open the door. You start serving others by the offerings that you make of food or money, or you start serving others by helping in the parking lot or by being up in the AV department. In serving others, the Dharma becomes alive. In serving others, we become alive. It's vital. It's vital. It's vital. Now, the nice thing is, you can serve other people even if you're a complete, total dolt. Even if you're an unenlightened schmuck, you can still serve others. So in serving others, you can in a way you can bypass the whole path. You just serve others, and you serve others, and you try to figure out how to do it skillfully, and you step on people's toes, and you drop hot water down their fronts, and you boil the soup or burn the soup, and just keep serving. And if you just keep serving, your life will become refined. If you just keep serving, the Dharma will become alive in you. You just keep serving. Now, what that means, of course, is different levels to different people, how we serve. So, in this process, I'm making all this up, by the way. This is, if I were to talk to you next week, I'd give you a different story. But I'm just making all this up. But this is true. This is the way things go. I see somebody taking notes. I'm just telling you, this is, but nonetheless, it's true. So in serving others, we find out again how inadequate we are. How do you actually help somebody? You can't change people, as all of us in relationship have known. All of us who have children know you can't change him. How do you serve somebody without trying to make them better, without trying to make them the way I think they should be? Now that is a real practice in itself. How do we serve the world without trying to make the world be like my agenda for it is. You know, we have these agendas. If only we had the right president. If only we had the right ecological attitude. If only she would clean up after herself. If only they would follow the calendar. If only they would be nicer to me. If only they would, feed the manatees. I don't know what it is. We all have our own version of this. We all have our own version. So in trying to serve people, we actually start off by saying, okay, I'm going to give you what I think you want. I'm going to give you my particular view of what I think you need. Okay, you need this, so I'm going to give it to you. But as all of us have tried, that doesn't work. So again, we fail. And then if we want to actually serve others, we have to really examine ourselves. We have to come back to center. We have to be back in the body. We have to be back right here. We have to look carefully with mindfulness. What's really needed? What's really needed? And as we serve and fail and endeavor to do better, we become more skillful. It's part of the path. The path becomes more and more skillful. And we become less and less self-centered in serving others, less and less self-centered. More about what really will be helpful. Now, there's different things that are helpful at different times, of course. But the number one thing that is always, always helpful is presence. Just being present with no judgment, with no opinion. We did a little talk, I think this weekend, about love. How do you know when you're loved? One of the ways that we know we're loved is when we're completely accepted. That one of the things that I always see with teenagers is I know they're really growing up when they accept their parents as they are. When they finally begin to say, well, they're not going to be the perfect person I would like them to be, but they're really going to be who they are, and I accept that. And that kind of deep acceptance of being present when somebody is dying, when somebody is suffering, when somebody's having a crisis, being really present with total, centered, calm acceptance is a gift that always is helpful. Now, if your mind is clear and you're sitting in your skin, right here, right now, and you're present with people, and you have the intention to serve and to be helpful, because of relationship, because of connection, something will happen. You'll say something. You'll offer something. You'll give them a hug. You'll give them a book. Something will happen. So then we begin to relate to our world through relationship instead of shoulds and oughts. Begin to relate to our world and the things that are driving us through connection, through presence. And we trust that presence. Because the world, it all works. We don't begin trusting all of our small-minded views that go around and 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 around, drive us crazy and drive everybody else crazy. So in presence, with respect for all life, with the intention to serve, something happens. Something happens. Something mysterious happens. Some way we touch one another's hearts. And some way our heart is touched. And so our view of who we are becomes ever larger because we realize that I am not this little thing in here, but the very person I'm serving is serving me. The very offering I give is being offered to me. That who I am is actually larger than I ever thought. How wonderful. And suddenly, it's no longer a dog-eat-dog world where I got to be right, and they got to be wrong, if I just win. Rather, it becomes an intermeshed, interwoven fabric of relationship, of kindness, of love, of appreciation, of respect. What a nice way to have a relationship. You're always going to fail. You always know you can always learn. And you can always serve. So the Dharma, I feel, becomes this process of serving. How do we serve? How do we serve? How do we serve more skillfully? How do we serve? How do we see? And then at another point of Dharma, as we keep practicing on this path, and our practice is letting go of self and connection and relationship, you actually can touch the place where everything is okay. Everything is okay. Now, the nice thing about that is if we see that, I know, everybody here is doing the best they can do. I know that. Given what we think, who we are in the circumstances, we are always doing the best we can do. Always. When you actually see that that's the way the world works, you can kind of say, oh, isn't that amazing? They're going to learn some hard lessons, but I gather they're doing the best they can do. The world is actually working, learning. So then, respect for all life is a different thing. It means that you respect not only the life that is common to all of us, but you respect each person's individual, unique effort, doing the best they can do to bring out the best, bring out the in them, to bring out wholesomeness, clarity, peace, whatever the case. Even people who seem crazy, it's right there because it's the fabric of wholeness. So then when you begin to practice Dharma with that kind of level, it's a different Dharma than when you are practicing and you're first trying to clear your mind. But guess what? If you see everything is working whole and complete, lacking nothing, everything is one, you still got to come back and do your own work. There's no shortcut. So again, it's a cycle. The more we see, the more deeply we practice, and the more important practice is, and the practice of being present, respect for all life, serving others. Go round and around. And it's a juicy Ferris wheel. And it turns what was samsara, the endless cycle of becoming, the endless cycle of suffering, into, in a way, exactly the same Ferris wheel. But instead of it being a terrifying journey, it becomes exhilarating. Wow, look what's happening now. So I hope all of you kind of get a chance to taste the Dharma at all these different levels. It's pretty cool. So Fred said I should ask for questions, or I am. I've been doing what I like all morning. Any comments or questions? Anything you'd like to ask or say?
This whole idea of everybody doing the best they can, I don't understand that exactly, because as you stated, you are given choices throughout the day, and you can choose to drink that bottle of wine or not drink that bottle of wine, or be unkind or be kind, all those choices. So how is it, I mean, if you just say we're all doing the best we can, absolutely, doesn't that kind of give you an excuse not to work harder?
I think that's a lovely question. Um, part of what I see is that in relationship, when we really are connected, and I really get to know people with all their hard times and all their confusion, even with a confused mind, they're still making the choice that's going to be They think this might be better to drink a bottle of wine right now than to face this. It might be better to get on the roller coaster than to take a quiet walk. I mean, they're always choosing something that will give us pleasure and freedom. Now, with a confused mind that's not centered from the outside, those look like pretty crazy choices sometimes. But from the inside, we all are doing the best we can do. You have been doing the best you can do your whole life. Your whole life, given who you are, what you're thinking, who you are, you've been doing the very best you can do.
So does that mean there should be no regret?
Well, all right, let's look. That's a wonderful thing. What would be the purpose of regret?
Learning a lesson and not doing it again.
So what I find happens is when we're unskillful, we break connection. We break connection. We break connection. And when we create that connection again, we don't tend to do the same thing over and over. We begin to learn that this breaks connection. This is painful. This is suffering. This is dukkha. And it's as we learn to connect more and more with our world and to do the things that are skillful about how do I really connect with my world, we find our behavior becomes more skillful. And we still do stupid stuff. So this respect for your life, respect for all the struggle that you've gone through in your life and everybody else, all that struggle. And in the midst of that struggle, in the midst of our confusion, our despair, we do the best we can. Now, let me take that a different way. Right here, right now, the only time that actually exists. If you are practicing loving kindness, I'm looking at you, but I'm talking to everybody. If we are practicing loving kindness right here, right now, and we truly appreciate this, whatever, we have to appreciate everything that led up to it. Otherwise, we'd be saying, well, I don't really like you. I think if I was just 3 inches shorter, I'd be better. If I was just over there a couple more inches, I'd be okay. Loving kindness has to come from the presence of what's real in this moment. When you appreciate this life by breathing, by practicing, by being present, and the only time there is, we can finally say, oh, I really, just like a teenager accepts their parents, I finally accept myself. I finally accept this is the way I am. I will do the best with it. I've always done the best with it. And I now vow to continue doing the best, to continue having connection. So, several different levels of answer to that. But that's the concern that we all have. If I let go of my anger and my fear and my resentment and my regret, will I turn into a mindless zombie? Or will I turn into certain presidents? I mean, boy. But it will not happen. It will not happen. Because if we let go of all those things that separate us, that break the connection to our humanity, that break the connection to one another, that interfere with our respect for all life, then out of connection, we always endeavor to do skillful things. Always. And so with that, I can confidently know everybody is doing the best they can. And I just hope you realize it. And we've got lots to learn. So Suzuki Roshi, one of the early West Coast Zen teachers, used to say, I look out in the room and everybody's sitting there meditating. It looks like a whole room full of Buddhas. And then they start talking, and I realize they're just human beings. So thank you for your question. I hope that touched some of the have deep respect. Anybody else? There's 2 people over here. Bruce right in the center, and this lady. Raise your hands up high so you can see who you are.
Oh.
Yes.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful to hear. This is just a little comment. I was thinking about Martin Luther King and Gandhi as you were talking because of how they served. And they served with such unconditional love for others. And Gandhi said his biggest problem, his biggest enemy wasn't the British, I'll never forget reading this, but himself. And so that makes me think, even those people, you know, that's what they had to really work on. And they serve a certain way, but you have to also look inside. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And I'm so impressed with this Sangha. People are serving all the time. Just in my few days of being here, there's all these people who are stepping up and helping out, and you know, and it's wonderful. They got good exemplars. There was another question back here.
Thank you. I had an indirect question.
That means you have a comment, so go ahead.
No, not a comment. It's not a Dharma question per se, but I was reading your biography that was posted on the center's website, and if memory serves you, earlier in your career you worked in a correctional facility or a prison, and that sort of jumped out at me. What did you bring from that experience, and how does it inform, or does it inform or influence your practice in any way?
Of course.
On that? Because there's talk about people bringing meditation to prisons now. I was just curious how that piece fit into your 50-year career. Thank you.
So just briefly, I lived in community with Fred for about 6-7 years. I ended up becoming a naturopathic doctor, which in Oregon is a really good license. I graduated, suffered. Went back to practice at the Zen Center of Los Angeles, still a naturopathic doctor. My wife and I left. There was a series of sexual and other scandals at UCLA back in the 70s. We left, and I became a psychologist, or at least I got a master's in psychology. And in Oregon, I already had a doctorate, so I was licensed by the state as a doctor, and I got a degree as a psychologist. Well, I didn't like being a holistic medical person. You know, in a way, it's the same thing I do now. I try to talk people into what's good for them, but you know. But I became a psychologist, and I found jobs in prison. So I worked with a sex offender unit for a long time, and I did evaluations of dangerousness and pre-release evaluations for dangerousness. And then I worked, I set up a program at one point in the security management unit, the SMU. There's another couple of units. Trying to sort out who is actually mentally ill and can't help themselves from who is a sociopath and is, and, you know, that's an interesting question. At what point are we mentally ill? At what point are we sociopaths? It's an interesting question. So in working with people, first off, my wife and I used to do, she worked with child abuse. So she was head of the country's largest child abuse program for a long time, the CARES program in Portland. So we would actually do workshops, perpetrator, victim, victim, perpetrator, and we could just see the cycle, round and around. People who are harmed and damaged as children, grew up angry and fearful as adults, and they would harm their children, and we just see the cycle going around and around and around, the cycle of suffering. Well, I know all those people are suffering at every level. They're all suffering. And I know that the way out is not to, I mean, there are people, thank goodness we have prisons. Thank goodness we got some people in boxes because their minds are so crazy. But the way out is working with the mind. The way out is working with breaking that barrier of self-centered fear and anguish. And so that's part of what I realize everybody is trying to do. You know, people in prison are trying to do that. And sometimes really unskillfully. Thank goodness there are people who are locked up. You can love anybody, But it's nice to have some people you love 3,000 miles away, or locked up. So it affected me a lot. First off, it gave me, I grew up in a very pure background. I was a naturopathic doctor. I lived in Zen centers and came from a very nice middle class kind of family. And suddenly I saw, oh my goodness, look at the world. Look what's out there. Look who's out there. And it's very helpful to really get a sense of, oh, here's some of the suffering of the world. Suffering, enormous suffering, enormous suffering. So I think it affected me a lot in many different levels. And in terms of my energy and my limited time, I don't think it's helpful for me to go to prisons. I just saw it way, way too much. I'd much rather come to Tampa, Florida and talk to all of you. I'm just babbling, but there's an attraction to going into prisons because you've got a captive population. People have nothing else to do, and you come in there and they say all nice things, but to actually have fundamental change is really, really hard. And when you've got a lifetime of practicing a certain kind of thinking, it's hard to make that change. Although sometimes the pain is so great you can do that. So, but I had to make a decision. What was the best use of my energy and time? So 7 years in the prisons, and I learned a lot. It was very, very helpful. So, suffering is so, it breaks your heart. As all of you know, in social services, it can break your heart. People suffer so deeply. And then we start thinking, if they just had more food, they just had medical care, if they just had good parents. And the key is loving kindness. And it starts right here in this room. Loving kindness. And so when we really transform our hatred and anger and our disconnect and our righteousness into connection and loving kindness, that does more for the world than trying to make everybody else change. More for our world. So random thoughts about prisons. Anybody else? Got time for one more comment or question here.
Thank you for being here for us today. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. I'm wondering your perspective on sitting with your own suffering. You talk about being present for people and how that's one of the greatest gifts you could be for somebody. Often I struggle with being present for people because of my own suffering. So essentially I'm not present with myself with love and compassion and anxious and depressed. What's your perspective on one, overcoming that and how to sit with that?
Sure, that's a very vital question, because when we're suffering so much, it is possible. I mean, there are other people who still need us because there's always people who are suffering more. No matter how bad we think it is, I guarantee you, outside, 2 doors down, there's somebody who's suffering more. So just the fact that we're having a really hard time doesn't mean that we can't do something. On the other hand, we have to look at the nature of suffering. What is suffering? What is it? When I'm really tortured, what's the cause of that? And if we actually begin looking carefully at it, we can have all of our body sensations, and pain comes and goes, and But if we look at the nature of our mind, and we look at, okay, I got this fixed belief, things should be the way I think things should be. I should be this way. And we start hating ourselves. We start thinking I shouldn't be that way. And we cause so much of our own suffering just by how our mind is thinking. So the first element of practice is to become centered. You clear the mind. And the way you clear the mind is, first off, you begin to look and see what's going on in there. And we begin to not believe we can think anything. We can think we're all rabbits, and I've used that analogy. We're all peacocks. And if we believe that, then we start strutting around. But we don't have to believe those thoughts. So when we don't believe the thoughts that are passing through, right there is already a mitigation of suffering. You want me to go on, or you have something you'd like to say? So I think it's very important that, as we start on the path of practice, we become present, feel the body from the inside, begin to look at the nature of how we cause our own suffering. And then, of course, if we cause ourselves suffering, we're causing everybody around us suffering. And there's lots of Dharma teachings. I mean, Fred can talk for days about how to work with that. So I encourage you to, practice, practice, practice. Okay? Okay? Fred's giving me the hook. Says, All right, great. Okay, thank you all very much for your time. Thank you very much for your presence. Thank you very much for practicing so diligently. And you got a great sangha here. I really appreciate it.